You're looking into real estate investment, you may have heard this term before, cap rate. And you might be wondering, what does it mean? How do I as a real estate investor use this so that I can make informed decisions in my real estate investing? Well, we're going to talk about that right now. What's going on, everybody? My name is Andrew, and if you're new to real estate or you're an experienced real estate investor, you ought to or would want to know what cap rate is. Well, basically what it stands for is it stands for capitalization rate, and it's basically a formula that real estate investors use to determine the value of a property. If you're just looking at a property value, you use this formula to determine whether or not it follows the rest of the real estate investing median. It helps you to understand if you're getting a deal on the property or you're not getting a deal. Well, we got to look at cap rate. Cap rate is a formula, and it basically goes like this. So you get cap rate, which is given as a percentage, which is equal to net operating income divided by property value, and that will give you a certain percentage. Now, because it's a formula, any one of these numbers can change, but you use this to plug into any listings that are giving you the net operating income and the property value, and you're able to determine whether or not this is a good cap rate for you. These numbers don't individually mean anything because you can always play with the numbers. You can play with and adjust net operating income, you can adjust property values, and then you can also adjust whether or not a good median cap rate to sell that is either 5, 6, 7, 8% or whatever it is. But if you just want to understand that at a glance, here's what you need to know. From a buyer's perspective, the lower the cap rate is, the more expensive a property is going to be, but presumably then it's also going to be more turnkey. But when we are talking about a property being more expensive, this is of course relative to the income because, net operating income is in the equation. And remember here, when the number on a cap rate goes down, the property is more expensive relative to income. If the cap rate goes up, the property is cheaper relative to its income. So 8% cap rate will be great for you. 3.5% is going to be hard for you as a buyer. In Toronto, for example, we stand at roughly a 3.8% cap, which means that properties are going to be relatively expensive to their income, which is why properties in Toronto generally won't cash flow. Where on the other hand, if you go to properties in Hamilton, where properties are performing at a 5 to 6% cap, you might find properties cheaper relative to the same income that you might see in Toronto, and that's why some properties in Hamilton are able to cash flow. So what this means is if you're buying either a little above or below that cap rate, this kind of tells you if you're getting a deal or not. For example, if you're looking at Hamilton and you know that the cap is 5 to 6% and somebody's trying to sell you one at 4%, you're getting hosed. If you find one that is like 7 or 8%, this might be something you need to scrutinize a little more because you might be looking at a property where, let's say, the net operating income isn't as accurate as you would want it to be. And you see this all the time in sweat equity properties where somebody is selling something and the landlord, when they say that the landlord is retiring, that's because they were putting in the sweat equity and they were the one managing the property, but they didn't show that in their net operating expenses, dictating the net operating income. Now, as a seller, you can play with these numbers a little bit, and this is why buyers need to be scrutinizing, because as a seller, I can decide how I want to present these and also just adjust maybe the rents or, whatever it is. This is why sometimes when people are selling a building, they have tenant turnover. It's really important that they get those rental numbers up because that is going to drastically impact the net operating income, which is going to affect the cap rate, which is going to affect the property value. Let's look at the first thing we talk about here, net operating income. This is all the income that we're left with after the expenses have been paid on the property. We're not talking about mortgages, we're talking about the general expenses otherwise. So let's talk about the first thing we covered here, which was net operating income. This is going to be the income that the property is left with after all expenses have been paid for, and there's a lot of things you need to consider here. So let's say we're working with a 6-unit property in Hamilton, Ontario, and we want to buy this property for, let's just say, $2 million. Now, let's say this property is renting out all units for $2,000 a month and it has an annual income of $144,000 a year. You want to subtract from that all of your utilities, taxes, insurance, maintenance fees, your vacancy, your property management fees, and anything else that you might be paying for. Now, if the seller here says that the NOE, net operating expenses, is a total of $43,200 a year, you as a buyer are going to do $144,000 minus $43,200, and you're going to be left with $100,800. Now, as we said before, a lot of sellers are going to play with these numbers a little bit, and they might not include things here like the property management expenses, or they might be dealing with certain nuances of the building that because they were doing things themselves, they just didn't include it because there's no way to actually timestamp their own hours of operation into this expense sheet, because what is their time worth? And we see this all the time where the property might have troublesome tenants where it's really in fact the landlord that's putting in a lot of sweat equity and time dealing with these disgruntled tenancies, and and it's really them that are holding this whole situation together and making the system continue to operate. But the minute they exit the equation, are you as a new buyer going to be able to fill that role or hire somebody to do that? And most importantly, what is that going to cost? So when somebody gives you the performance sheet on a property, you really need to look at this and decide whether this actually makes sense. If somebody is giving you a property and selling it to you at a 7 or 8% cap in Hamilton, or if they're selling it to you at, let's say, a 4 or 5% cap in Toronto, there is really no reason why somebody ought to be selling a property like that unless it came with problems. That doesn't mean that there's no opportunity here, because you ought to be thinking about when you're buying a property, you ought to be looking at it like a business, where if you can go in there and find out where the problems are, how can you optimize this so that you can make this into a cash flow engine? But let's just say all the numbers are true. We want to calculate the cap rate. What do we do? So we're going to take the net operating income, which was $100,800. We're going to divide that by the property value, which is $2 million. And we're going to come up with a number 0.0504, which is pretty much a 5% cap. So is that good or bad? Well, what you got to understand is you got to understand the median cap for the city that you're shopping in. So as we said, 3.8 in Toronto, between 5 and 6 in Hamilton. And if you find a property that's a 5% cap, remember, the lower the number, the more expensive the property is relative to its income. So the higher you go on the cap, you're going to be having something that's potentially more cash positive than relative the next one, right? So this may or may not work for you depending on where you're shopping for this, but you as a buyer, the way that you can use this formula is you can play around with the numbers to get an idea of what you are looking for in a property. So when you're filtering, or if you're working with a realtor and you're trying to find a property, you can tell them, this is what I need. I need roughly this type of NOI. I need roughly this type of a cap rate. And that means that we're going to be finding a property at roughly this value. So any property that you find within the cap rate that you've said you're okay with, that's going to give you roughly what it is you're looking for. And you can play around with it, tweak it a little bit until you use this tool to help you find the property you're looking for. And remember what I said before, if somebody is going to be selling a property that is 7% and it's just a whole percentage point above the median cap, there's no reason for anybody to be selling it like that, so you really ought to scrutinize it accordingly. And remember, if you're looking to sell a property, you can also use cap rate to help you optimize the property. For example, if you want to sell it at a 7% cap and we use that same building, we understand that you need to have roughly $110,000 of net operating income, and then you can push the valuation of your building and accordingly so that you can hit a 7% cap. The point here is that understanding the formula is going to help you understand what's happening in the market, what the medians and averages are, and this will help you to decide how you want to go either about optimizing your property or acquiring a property. So with that being said, there's still a lot more to learn about capitalization rate, but if you want help in your real estate investing journey, as always, we're going to have some info about us in the description below. And if you enjoyed this video, found value from it, make sure to hit that like button, make sure to subscribe, and I will see you on the next one.